Hello, welcome to Walk in the Park. My name is Tony Ingram, and this is episode 131 in March 23rd, 2016. Walk in the Park, walkinthepark.tv. You can go to my website and see this episode and all of our episodes, and you can get the full schedule of the cable casts. So we're going to go back this week. Last week we were at Watkins Glen State Park in Watkins Glen, about 20 miles west of Ithaca. And we were looking at the history there of a resident artist named Captain James Hope, who was there from 1872 to 1892. And so in this picture here, this aerial photograph by Bill Hecht, in the middle you can see this crease going across the landscape. Well, that is the gorge called Watkins Glen, and it's also, of course, the state park. And above that is Seneca Lake, and on the extreme right is the village of Watkins Glen. Okay, so you've probably been there. If you haven't, then maybe this picture will inspire you. This is halfway up the gorge at Central Cascade at the upstream end of an section called Glen Cathedral. So we're going to, as I said, talk about James Hope. James Hope was came to Watkins Glen in 1871 originally to paint a painting, but he had been a Civil War captain from Vermont originally, who was a scout. He had organized a regiment from Vermont to go fight for the Union Army. And he was a scout, and he was also a map maker and an artist. He got very ill while he was there, and so they had to mainly do sketches of battles and artwork and so forth. And he actually became eventually famous for that. And he was a portrait painter by profession. Before that, he had been a cart maker and so forth. But he lived in Vermont, and he would go to Montreal and New York City and so forth, and had studios there. In the wintertime, he would paint portraits of wealthy people. And that's how he supported his family back in Castleton, Vermont. So he also, but his main love was landscape painting. And he had done a few things like that. We went over this in the last show. And some of it was got some note down in New York City, and a gentleman named P.J. Rolfe, I believe it was, came to him and asked him to paint this waterfall that happened to be in Watkins Glen. This is a 19th century sketch of Rainbow Falls and Triple Cascade, but Rainbow Falls had become famous already by 1870 or so. The gorge called Watkins Glen was first opened up in 1863 as a public attraction, and quickly caught on. So Mr. Rolfe said, "I will pay you $10,000 to paint Rainbow Falls." And so this was a dream come true for James Hope, Captain James Hope, and he went to Rainbow Falls. He went to the gorge, and he was met by the promoter of the gorge, a guy named Morval Donnells, and this is all in review, who took him up through the gorge, and he saw Rainbow Falls, and he began to paint it. So in 1871, he painted a painting like this. This painting was done in 1871. This is Rainbow Falls on the left. You can just see it, and then Triple Cascade. This looks like an autumn painting, so the one he did for Mr. Rolfe was in the early summer. So this is probably not that same painting, but it's a big one, and it was painted in the same year, 1871. There are a number of James Hope's paintings still around. This is one actually that I believe is this is in the Schuyler County Historical Museum in the village of Montour Falls, hanging on their wall there. It's a smaller one. Here's another smaller one of Rainbow Falls that is in the Watkins Glen Public Library. So you can see these things around. And there are some other paintings throughout the Northeast, in Boston, New York City, Elmira. There are paintings of James Hope's that sometimes are on display. So what we're going to do is continue our story. James Hope came to Watkins Glen in 1871, and Morval Donnells took him up through the gorge to Rainbow Falls, and he painted his painting. So, but we bypassed some of the developments in the gorge, in the Glen at that time. This is a artist's conception from the air back before there were airplanes. I guess there were hot air balloons, so maybe they could get these perspectives back then. Notice where I have a labeled bridge. That is a footbridge that goes across the gorge. The gorge goes from the upper left down to the lower center. And there are some buildings around that footbridge. I don't know if you can notice. But this bridge was built in 1872, which was the time that James Hope actually moved to Watkins Glen. And at the north end of this bridge was this building on the right that was eventually built. It was built, I guess, probably built by the time he first came there. And there's a staircase coming up to this building on the right at the top of the gorge, coming up out of the gorge and to this building called originally the Northglenn Mountain House, or the Glen Mountain House, and then renamed the Swiss Chalet when another building was built. Here's a couple of other pictures of it here. This is here's another photograph. This was sort of a souvenir shop, snack shop, so forth, a store. Now, down below, this is a Currier and Ives print of the gorge from down in below, looking up to that footbridge called, at that time it was called the Iron Bridge. Now they call it the Suspension Bridge. And on the left was that building we were just looking at. So we're looking in the opposite direction. We're looking from upstream to downstream before we were coming up the gorge. And on the right-hand side of the bridge is a hotel, which became known as the Glen Mountain House, also built about 1872. So a photograph of the bridge from below back in those days. And today, this is what the bridge looks like from below down in the gorge. Again, this shot here, looking at the bridge today. So that ironwork there is the original ironwork, dated 1872, and is still there. This is what it was back then. And you can see, now this is looking from the north side of the gorge over to the Glen Mountain House Hotel from the other side. And so right behind us to the left would be that Swiss Chalet building. Here's the hotel, looking from the other side of the hotel, looking at it. So it's an L-shaped hotel. And behind the hotel would be the gorge, and then some folks, a big gathering of people on the porch of the hotel, the Glen Mountain House Hotel, which was there for about 30 years until it burned down approximately 1902, I think. So Captain Hope, he came there, he fell in love with the place, and he decided to move his family from Vermont to Watkins Glen, to the gorge at Watkins Glen. So here's a painting that he did in 1873, obviously in the winter, looking from the west towards the Swiss Chalet, and you can see the footbridge, the suspension bridge or iron bridge as it was called, on the lower right there. So there it is. I love that picture. I used that as a screensaver for a while in the wintertime. And just behind us is a trail that's a path that goes down into the gorge. It's called Lover's Lane, and it was there at that time as well. And I always get a kick out of looking at this sign because it's singular, and so maybe there was just one lover. I don't know if it was a man or woman or whatever. But so by themselves. No, obviously it's a grammatical error, at least in terms of intention. And here's the path today as it heads down into the gorge, back into the gorge. Now, if you were on Lover's Lane back then, though, and you're looking back from the other, a little bit farther along, perhaps from where those pictures I took were taken, you would look back, and there you can see in the back is the Swiss Chalet, but there's an art gallery on the left there and a gazebo on the right. Well, that was James Hope's art gallery and home. We'll turn around and we'll look around it like this. So this was his gallery. This is looking back from the direction, from the Swiss Chalet direction, looking west along Lover's Lane. And the gazebo now is on the left. This is and on the right of each of these two shots is the gallery and also home where James Hope and his family lived. So, well, what is this double picture? Well, I talk about these often. These are called stereographs, and they're taken by a special camera like this one that has two lenses in it, and it takes a double picture a few inches apart that are about the distance apart your eyes are, so you get a stereo picture. So these two pictures, if you look at them through a stereo viewer, you will get a 3D image. Pretty cool thing. And here's a woman back in those days. Those became extremely popular, and there are just thousands of these things around now that people can look at, but they don't have the stereo viewers anymore. Maybe somebody does. So here's just one side of that stereo viewer, once again looking back at Hope's gallery and home back in the 1870s, 1880s maybe, I don't know, back in that time. And here is one of Hope's paintings of his own gallery and home, and the gazebo on the left, looking back along Lover's Lane. So that's a really nice picture. A drawing from the time, a map showing where the structures were. Now you can see a road that comes up on the bottom and that cuts across the gorge. That's the stream, the gorge there, and then goes left. It says ticket office, Swiss Chalet or Northglenn Mountain House, and to the left it's cut off. It says Hope's Gallery. So that's an orientation of where it was. A modern map today from the park shows, you can see the gorge and the stream, and then you see this red trail up there, and on the north side of the stream, and the upper side, and the bridge that goes across. That's the suspension bridge. There's a lily pond. The Glen Mountain House Hotel and the Swiss Chalet are both long gone. And then you see Lover's Lane going off from that trail junction of the upper side of the bridge there. And it's just to the left of that intersection there is where Hope's Gallery was back in the old days. And so that was pretty cool. So we're going to continue the journey up through Watkins Glen that Captain Hope took, and he painted a lot of other scenes besides the Rainbow Falls. Now I'm going to see if I can read this for you here. I can look at it on my own, coming right up here. This is a pretty cool stuff on here. Let's see. There we go. All right, so that says actually Hope's art gallery, obviously. This gallery contains many of Captain Hope's finest paintings of the wonderful scenery of Watkins Glen and its romantic surroundings. It is located but a few rods above the mountain house and will be a feature of special interest and attraction to visitors. No person should visit the Glen without seeing the splendid works of art embraced in this collection, among which are Hope's celebrated painting of Rainbow Falls, sold for $10,000, and his Army of the Potomac, a large and superb picture, and the only one representing the whole of the Grand Army encamped on the same field. Also his Forest Glen, Gem of the Forest, Sylvandale, and numerous others. So this poster is actually hanging in the Schuyler Historical Museum as well. So here again is the picture I have of Rainbow Falls. It was painted in 1871, but I think it probably wasn't the one, as I said, that originally fetched $10,000. Who knows? Because they're saying it's displayed there. I don't know. So once again, the Army of the Potomac. Well, here is one of the paintings that he did during the Civil War, actually in 1865. This is the Grand Army of the Potomac, the Union Army, near the end of the war. And so he's actually, as I said, more famous for his Civil War paintings. And we'll talk a little bit more about that near the end of the show if we have time. So let's go back to another, well, this is actually maybe one of the same, yeah, another shot here, looking from the art gallery and the gazebo back to the Swiss Chalet. But the reason I've included this is the label below. This is from the back of the card, the stereograph card, and that is actually what's significant about that. So you get the, see if you can read what that says. Anyway, that's by Charles Bierstadt. Charles Bierstadt, photographer, Niagara Falls, New York, is what it says on there. And it says also on the left-hand side, it says on the edge, Charles Bierstadt, photographer, Niagara Falls, New York. So Charles Bierstadt took a lot of pictures at Watkins Glen, but he took them elsewhere too. He took, this is a picture in Yosemite, what's now Yosemite National Park. And I'm not sure it was a national park quite then. Maybe it was. It was one of the early national parks. And now here's on the back of a card here, it says Charles Bierstadt, photographer, Niagara Falls, And that has, let's see if I can read that one. That's a little bit hard. That says, stereoscopic views of California, Niagara Falls, Hudson River, Saratoga, Washington, New York, Watkins Glen, Havana Glen. And they also, on the part of the card that's not shown here, there's a lot of stuff in Europe. So this guy got around, but his brother, I think it's actually his younger brother, Albert Bierstadt, is better known. They were both, actually he and his brother Edward were all born in Germany, but when they were kids, their parents brought them to the United States. And Albert Bierstadt became a Hudson River School painter, as was James Hope. And he was probably the most famous of the frontier painters from that time. Yeah. Probably recognized as the foremost painter of the American frontier during the 19th century. So, and here is one of his famous paintings of Yosemite Valley. So Charles clearly had gone out there with his brother and took some photos and added to his line. So now I'm going to show you a painting of Yosemite. This is El Capitan. That's what this other picture was, El Capitan, the famous cliff in Yosemite. Well, this is El Capitan, painted by James Hope. What's the story here? Did James Hope go out to, he was a lesser-known guy. He never went to Yosemite. But as was the custom at the time, some of these painters painted from other people's paintings or sketches, and they added their own elements and so forth. So there's James Hope's painting of Yosemite, El Capitan in Yosemite, now in Yosemite National Park, where he never visited. He never had gone there. So I got there again a couple of years ago. I hadn't been there for many years, and wow, was that worth it. But let's go back to Watkins Glen. And this is one of his paintings of Rainbow Falls, really one of the best known spots in the Glen, and even immortalized in the writings of Mark Twain, who was down in Elmira. We talked about that in the first part of this show, in the last episode in 130. But we're going to continue beyond Rainbow Falls. This is as far as we got before, going up through the Glen. This is called, what is that, Sylvan Gorge or something? Let me see if I can read that. Oh, Shadow Gorge, which is the section of gorge just upstream from Rainbow Falls. Here is a photograph I took of it a number of years ago, called Shadow Gorge because the gorge runs from the west, which is the direction we're looking in, to the east, which would be behind the photographer. And so the sun is always in the southern half of the sky. So the left-hand side or the south side of the gorge is most of the time is in shade, whereas the other side is bathed by the sun in the southern half of the sky. So it's called Shadow Gorge. In fact, the trail used to go up on the left-hand side in the shadow, but it has been moved over to the right now. So then we get up into a section called the Frowning Cliff section. Artist's Dream is the first part of what's called the Frowning Cliff. So this was a favorite spot, as you can imagine, for artists, and this is what it looks like today with this pool in the gorge. The whole gorge along here they called Glen Arcadia. That one has kind of fallen away, but in my book I call it Glen Arcadia. And there's a number of photographs that I have from then, because there were artists in the gorge, but obviously lots of photographers too. Photography was taking off back at this time, from the Civil War on, and even a little before. So you can see here there's some photographers setting up their cameras and taking pictures. This is another shot looking back through Frowning Cliff area. And yet another photograph. This is looking, I think this is what, Pluto Falls, maybe? Yeah, they called this, one of the names of this was Elfin Gorge and Fairy Pool. Okay, they had all different kinds of names for each little section of gorge, depending upon which way you were looking. If you turned around, it was called Spiral Gorge, just the views. They named all the views depending on the perspective. Another of the Frowning Cliff section photograph here. Look at this guy sitting right on the edge here. There's a lot of photographs I have of Pluto Falls, which is a little waterfall right in this very dark section of the gorge. I guess they named it that because it was so dark. It was kind of like the underworld. And Pluto was, of course, the Roman god of the underworld. So, not the dog, not the planet. Here's another drawing of Pluto Falls, and look at this trail structure. They had all these different wooden trail structures. Just about every picture is different because they didn't last long with landslides and floods and so forth. And another picture in the Frowning Cliff area. And here is one of James Hope's wonderful paintings. This one actually is in the Arnott Art Museum in Elmira. And it was on display a year ago at the Rockwell Museum in Corning. So this is actually in my book about Watkins Glen, which I may have a chance to tell you about. And here's another painting. So both of these are the Frowning Cliff area. This one is, I think, in Boston. Where is that? Yeah, this is in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And I don't know where this one is. That's a lovely fall painting. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know where this painting is held, but it's maybe in a private collection or something like that. And then this is a modern photograph of that whole charming, dark section of Gorge. That's really one of my favorite parts of Watkins Glen, is the Frowning Cliff, Glen Arcadia, Elfin Gorge, Spiral Gorge, Pluto Falls area. So this summer, this spring, this summer, you're going to go up in there and see it for yourself. It's pretty amazing. Well, beyond there, the gorge levels out, and you don't have these big waterfalls and stuff. But it's not as loud, it's not as crowded, and it's actually a very serene section of Watkins Glen. So James Hope painted this one in 1876. I'm not sure what the name of this one is, just Watkins Glen, I guess. And then here's another one that is actually, see if we can get this one. This one is in the Schuyler County Historical Museum from that same section, which back in those days they call it Glen Facility because it was easy. It was there weren't any steep sections and rugged areas and big waterfalls. And the title on this painting is The Ramble from 1884. Pretty cool. So the Ramble, and then this is another picture from about that same location today. We're going to take a look at a few photographs of this section of the Glen. Actually, up in the Glen, is some more photographs of the area. Now, take a look at the guy in the center, just below center, slightly left. There's a guy sitting there. He's doing something. So let's zoom in on him. He's a painter. Could that have been James Hope? I actually don't think so. But there's a painter. So photographers and painters love this place. Photographers still do. You don't see too many painters anymore. Probably not much room to set up an easel with all the folks coming by. And there's probably the same guy. I don't know if it's the same painting on the staircase. The grand staircase, which goes up beyond, you can see just left of center there, is the Central Cascade, which was in my first picture of the show. All right, so now James Hope was, he was the resident artist. He was there from 1872 to 1892. Well, his son, James D. Hope, came and joined him. He went to, I think he went to Niagara Falls, and he studied photography. So he became the Glen photographer, and he lived on many more years beyond his father and produced many, many photographs of the Glen, which were sold there. So he was the resident photographer for decades. And this is a couple of his photographs from a guidebook, a guide pamphlet that I copied. So lots and lots of, if you see these old photographs of the Glen like this. Now this was an early one called the Long Stairs, which climbed up above cavern Cascade, which is quite a waterfall in the gorge. And now you go into a tunnel. You go into something called the Spiral Tunnel, and you can go up through the cliff above the waterfall that way. You don't have to take the long stairs. So anyway, so James Hope lived in his gallery till 1872, and towards the end of his life, he wanted to finish some paintings he had started of the Battle of Antietam back in, I forget just which year that was. That was what year? Obviously during the Civil War. See if I can bring that up. Yeah. You know, now I don't know when it was. Maybe it was 1863 or so, or 64. Anyway, it was the bloodiest battle, said to be the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. And he finished a number of big paintings of it. And this is called Bloody Lane, and there's like 5,000 dead on the battlefield there. He didn't glorify war. And another scene of battle. This one is Artillery Hell's the name of this one. And Wasted Gallantry is another this one. There's stories behind each one of these paintings, and I don't, A Fateful Turn. Okay, I don't have time to read the stories about them, but so this is actually what he became famous for, more than his Watkins Glen paintings. Captain James Hope, the well-known artist of Watkins, died early on Thursday morning last week in the 74th year of his age. His oil paintings representing scenes on the battlefield of Antietam have made him famous. His last illness was malarial fever resulting from exposure at the recent national encampment of the Grand Army of the Republic at Washington. He was a valiant soldier in the war, and while in the service contracted diseases from which he never recovered. He was an artist of rare genius, and his 4 great paintings alluded to above were masterpieces of art and excited the admiration of critics and of both continents. So anyway, so he was buried in the cemetery just north of what's now the park, and his there's something else I want to say. Oh yeah, the paintings were eventually taken down and put in a church somewhere. Somebody bought the paintings, put them in a church, and in 1979, the National Park Service found them and removed them and restored them and put them at Antietam National Battlefield Historic Site. So that's all we have time for today. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you again next time.